From Ticker, this is Black Belt Leader. Here's Karen Gately.
Welcome to Black Belt Leader. I'm Karen Gately, founder of Corporate Dojo. On the show today, we'll be discussing how to accurately assess the character and culture of the candidates that you consider for your business. We're lucky to be joined by two leading experts in the field. First, we have Karen O'Brien. Karen is the Director of Office Support and Human Resources at Miller Leith. Karen and I have been working together for a long time, and I have no doubt she'll have plenty of advice to share about how to choose the right people. Also joining us will be Chris Caiger-Watson. Chris is the Director and Founder of GeniusPeople. Chris has extensive experience again in the search and career counselling side of life. So welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Glad you could be here. In my experience, the need to get that character assessment right is fundamental. So I thought we could start with some horror stories. You know, when have you seen organisations get it wrong, where we haven't assessed the character of the human being and their fit? And we've lived to regret it. I might start. Chris, jump in if you have
look, we were laughing before, weren't we, about the old adage of a candidate losing their job before they've started at the Christmas party or something. But I think it's a really interesting point, because I think with everyone's got their game face on, how do you accurately validate someone's character or values alignment to a business? But as a recent story, I had a fantastic lady, a mum returning to work. So very nervous, bit of a confidence hit coming back into work, and looking to move back into the formal side of insolvency as it was. So she'd come from a background in a big financial services environment, doing some really fulfilling work in the agri space, turnaround, restructuring, going out to these communities with generations of families that are suffering financial hardship. Coming back into work, she'd then taken a job in the more formal side of insolvency that's a little bit more cutthroat.
Yes.
So, I mean, in the context of what we're talking about, how does that business validate, her values alignment to the formal side? Because the first engagement she actually had was trying to take a lady, who's a bit unwell, very unwell, suffering with cancer, trying to take her bankrupt estate. So going from that really fulfilling alignment of values in the restructuring and turnaround to suddenly doing that, and she actually handed a notice in after 2-3 weeks. So you think about the investment of getting someone set up in the business and everything, and the excitement and having some gender diversity in their directorship and genuinely a lovely, lovely soul in the business as well, to then the message it sends out in the market that she's left. Very, very difficult, but I do think it fundamentally comes down to the values alignment of what she actually wanted in her next role.
And I totally agree with that, and also some of the fundamental character traits that it takes to deal with that kind of work day in, day out. In terms of emotional resilience, the ability to step back from things and maintain objectivity and not get too caught up in that from an emotional perspective, empathy perspective. Doesn't necessarily mean that someone doing that job is cold-hearted, but there has to be a toughness around the way they think and operate.
And knowing yourself well enough to know that you could actually do that role and do it well day in, day out, and that you would cope with the hardship that comes with being in a position like that. I often find that with candidates who work in the community services area, where they're working at the coalface with families and children, or the Indigenous communities, and they might be working with the youth justice system, and so they're seeing the damage of families in crisis, and they're always dealing in crisis, and they have to be highly responsive. The turnover rate in that business is extreme, and you go about applying for those roles with the best of intent and qualifications to do it well, but it's having that skill set and that mindset that you can continue doing that work day in, day out. Coming back to your question about horror stories, and there's quite a theme that often follows with clients where, and it comes down to their process in how they recruit their staff, but often there's that unconscious bias that creeps in, that they hire people that they like or who are like them.
Exactly.
And then they lack the follow-through in terms of probity checking with their people, and you'll often hear horror stories, of where individuals have been hired into areas of finance where they have access to company funds, and they are the go-to with regards to transactions within the business. How often do you hear that those people have taken money from the business? And I had a first-hand experience of that many years ago in recruitment, where the business, not myself, hired someone in to run their contracting desk, and he was, big personality, fun to have around, knew the process, but behind the scenes and in 2 other roles was siphoning off funds into his own bank account. And of course there were no checks and balances until one firm did check and they started following through. And one day he went off on sick leave saying he was very unwell and he may not be back, and all of a sudden we had the police on our doorstep wanting to have a quiet chat with said candidate. So it comes down to also probity checking and making sure you go through a thorough process, not only about the checks and balances around their character and their fit to culture. I find that this is something that still continues this day. So,
and look, and to be clear about what we're talking about, character is that internal world. Our personality is what the rest of the world sees, and how we interact with people, and clearly that matters. But our character is the internal compass. It's the things that we don't necessarily see on the surface. So again, help us to understand, what are some of the ways that leaders can, even as a starting point, decide what character traits matter? What are some of the things that I really need to be testing for? And, once we've got a bit clear on what we're testing for, I'll then obviously lead us down the path of how do we test for it.
Absolutely.
But, when it comes to people being really successful, and perhaps Chris, I'll start with you, what are the character traits you think make the biggest difference?
Oh, look, I think it's a great point, because I think, obviously counselling big businesses on their recruitment process, everyone's got their game face, right? And often, depending on the demands on the business, I think actually, and I've had one example very recently where it's a very lax process, one interview and offer. And the candidate,
that's incredibly common.
Incredibly common. But this goes 2 ways on the client and the candidate side, because I think, you can often be a product of environment, what happens to be sat on Seek, who has applied to the actual job itself, giving you some of our objection handling here from a recruitment perspective. But actually, do you want the best person on Seek, or do you want the best person in the market?
That's right.
So I think, from a values perspective, and I had a fantastic candidate once ask a leader of a business, well into his 60s, what are your values as a leader? And he actually said to me after the interview, I've never been asked that before, and he didn't really have a set answer. So therefore, I think you lose some of that authenticity in that dialogue, because you don't have that robust process. And I think from a business perspective, it's not just that leader, the final interview, it's often the 2-3 stage process. Is there an actual alignment of values and what you're looking for in characters at all levels? Because I think a candidate will often be a little bit more relaxed when they're speaking to someone at their peer level, often over a coffee, so they're a bit more disarmed, and then that's often a good opportunity to really test that outside. But I think you're looking at integrity, I think you're looking at authenticity, sincerity, those sort of traits that we all want, not just in business, but in life, from our leaders.
Absolutely.
So I think they're the sort of, accountability, things like that, they're the key ones.
Absolutely. And taking it the step further, when you look at the role in context that candidate is coming into, what are the key characteristics that sets a successful candidate apart to one that is just surviving in the job? And often I'll find it's about resilience, it's about their ability to work with change, it's their ability to adapt and flex to what's in front of them in the business. It's about collaboration and truly showing traits of wanting to be part of a team as opposed to a working solo. So I find in good leadership, if the business leaders set the purpose, their goals and their values from the get-go and decide who they want to be, that intrinsically feeds down to the type of people they want to surround themselves in their business. Because, and it's really interesting, Karen, because what I found, I've been doing this for a long time, we won't put a number to it, and I started very young, that's all I'm going to say.
You and I have been hanging out for over 20 years, so just to give us a bit of context.
Well, exactly, yes. But what I found is that the conversation has changed, and years ago, values didn't even come into the conversation. Character didn't come into the conversation. It was, could you do the job? Are you breathing? When can you start? Great, you've got the job. And then everyone just motored along. And what people have found over time, they've started to really review what's made their business successful versus what have been the ongoing problems that they've had. And common theme is retention. If we can absolutely track retention to good values, good culture in a business. People stay with good businesses, they stay with good managers, and when that starts to fall over, they leave. And
they engage in great environments.
Absolutely.
What I passionately believe is the bridge between our potential, which is our knowledge, skill and experience, and optimal standards performance is actually the behavioural choices that we make.
Absolutely.
And those behavioural choices are a very clear reflection of our character, including the values that we hold true. Again, it's there's many examples that I could also point to of leaders hiring on the basis of that technical competence.
Yes.
And whilst, as you've pointed out, Karen, the world has changed quite a lot in that more employers are assessing character, it's still a common gap where we get excited about the CV, the person's been there, done that, but the real question is, are they likely to do it again in the future? Do they want to?
Yes.
And to what extent can we predict the way they're going to go about that?
How can we test it?
Exactly. So I'm keen to understand, so for example, I've heard things like we need accountability, we need integrity, in my mind we need respectfulness, we need people to actually want to collaborate and be part of something as opposed to just thinking about themselves as an individual. We need people to be open-minded. So there's a lot of different character traits that we can prioritise, and what I've heard you say is start by being clear on what they are for your business. Let's take accountability as an example. Again, I'll give you a turn to go first, Karen. So tell us, but just so you can get first answers out there. Tell us about how you assess accountability. How do you really know whether or not a candidate is likely to turn up in the job and fulfil the promises that they've made to the employer?
Absolutely. Well, for me, it comes back to the approach I take with the candidate at interview, and we're talking earlier about, interviews on their own are quite fake in a sense that people are on their best behaviour, they're wanting to show their best self. And candidates generally, the walls are up. I mean, recruitment consultants, we don't enjoy the best reputation in terms of the way in which we manage candidates. So when the candidate comes and has a really strong experience with someone, there's a defining difference in how they think about our industry for a start. And it's about gaining their trust and really explaining to them what your purpose is in that meeting, what we're here to do for them today, and to get them to bring down the walls, because it is about authenticity. Chris spoke about this before, and you really want to see their true self.
Absolutely.
People generally won't allow themselves to be vulnerable in that setting. They want to tell you what you need to hear that puts them in front of that client for that job, because they need that job. So through the process, and I do spend quite a bit of time with someone to really understand what I call their life journey. Take me back to the beginning of your work life, but let's go back even before that. Tell me about your family and your upbringing. Tell me about your choices that you made at school and why. And, let me in to understand who you are as a person. And with that, just very naturally, their character starts to present in terms of who the person that they are and what they're looking for in their work environment. And then it comes down to storytelling. So if we want to talk about accountability specifically, this is one of the key facets of this job, that you really do need to take accountability for what you do. So talk me through a time where that was really important in a business. What was the situation? And talk me through what actually happened there. Was it a good ending? Was it a bad ending? If it was a bad ending, how did you deal with that? Because I actually love to get from candidates their best ever experience at work, and their input and their achievement and how that was recognised and how they felt. But also the worst thing they ever did, the biggest mistake they ever made. What did they do? How did they deal with it? What was the fallout? And that to me sort of shows their level of self-awareness of themselves. Who am I as a person? How am I likely to react in any given situation at work? So the storytelling is powerful. And if you play that scenario through the key deliverables to that particular business, it does give you a snapshot of that person. So that's my sort of
I love that.
process.
What I've heard you say loud and clear is get people to tell the stories that reveal their inner world. How do they think? How do they feel? How do they typically behave? and what does that mean for predicting their contribution or approach in business. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to be continuing this conversation around how do we make sure that we're hiring the right people into our businesses in the first place.
This is Ticker.
From Ticker, this is Black Belt Leader. Here's Karen Gately.
Welcome back to Black Belt Leader, where we're talking to Chris and Karen about how we can make sure we're hiring the right people into our business. So Chris, before we went on the break, we were talking to Karen about accountability and how we really assess that. Yeah. What, in your experience, some of the things you recommend?
Well, I think it works. I think it works on both ways, because I think with the ever increasing percentage of millennials in the workplace, they look for different things. As Karen rightly pointed out, that loyalty, that longevity, need a job. I don't think that exists as much. It is about fulfillment. It is about an alignment of values, corporate social responsibility.
Agree.
All these wonderful things now that millennials want to feel that they're making an impact. And I think putting it back to the business from a client's perspective around accountability, one of the key issues in my particular industry in accounting and finance is gender diversity. So in terms of everyone having a policy and saying that we do these wonderful things and we have these wonderful values, the accountability, and always get these candidates to us, is how are they demonstrating that as a business and as a leader? Because I think from a diversity perspective, if you have a wonderful mum returning to work or something like that, they will not take that flexibility unless they are seeing their leaders of the business doing the same. Otherwise, they will.
Because otherwise, it's not safe to do.
Well, they will think that it will impact on their progression opportunity. So that accountability has to come from both sides. How you demonstrate that in a 3-hour effectively interview process, I think, is where you really need to have a robust understanding.
I think that's a fantastic point, that sometimes as leaders we say, these are the character traits I want in other people, here's the cultural values, here's the cultural environment. We say that in theory, but we don't practice what we preach. We don't actually live those values. So again, unless we are going to step fully into that place and start with self-leadership, it's unlikely we'll be able to see that in other people and attract it into our businesses.
And to flip that around from the example that you gave with mums returning to the workforce, I've had a number of conversations with men looking to change roles, and where the leaders haven't taken up parental leave. And in this day and age, men want to be as present as their partners with raising children, and they want that time out to be able to do that. But if they don't see their leaders taking that time, they'll hesitate to even put in a request. And sometimes when they do, it's taken, but then they know it's frowned upon.
Absolutely.
So it's say one
Agree,
thing,
Karen.
practice another, and they say, well, it's there, and I took it, but then when I returned, I was overlooked for
There was
promotion.
an attitude.
And there was
I
a real
think-
attitude, absolutely.
Yeah. And again, I think that's living the values, isn't it? I certainly can speak from personal experience. My husband's been a full-time stay-home father for over 25 years. And certainly when he made that decision, the judgment from other people on both of us is really quite extraordinary. And I see that persisting in the world of business. You know, what is expected of both men and women can be a challenge.
Just to add to that, sorry, I don't think it's just about a promotion cycle as well in those situations, because I've had examples where there are men and women coming back from parental leave, and yes, the policy is in place, but they're not getting exposed to the big ticket complex matters of that business because of their lack of flexibility. You know, if you've got a job and you need to be away for 2 weeks or what have you. So therefore there is no robust policy in place, and with technology that we all enjoy today, they should be able to resource and put a team together to be able to cater for someone to leave at 4 o'clock to go and pick their kids up and still be involved in the sexy complex matters that gives them the fulfillment, which in turn then gives them the quality of productivity that we want as leaders in the business.
Energy, engagement,
absolutely.
performance.
Actually, as a personal story to that, when I returned from maternity leave years ago, and I was actually working for a wonderful woman who was a mother and a grandmother, yet I experienced some real pushback with her when I returned from maternity leave, and I was there part-time in the business, doing a full-time job, mind you, in part-time hours. But I questioned her on it, and I thought, you're actually discriminating against me because of the situation I'm in. And she said, you're absolutely right. So coming from someone who had lived through that herself, I thought, this is extraordinary.
I got to throw one in now as well. I was actually reflecting on this the other day, and my thought was, if I knew what I know now, this employer would be in big trouble. But when I fell pregnant with my first child, my boss called me in for a meeting, and he literally said, look, it's going to be a bit unpredictable as to when you can work, so how about we just put you on casual and we'll just pay you for whatever hours you're able to do.
Outrageous.
Wow.
Outrageous, right?
Outrageous.
So going back, because obviously that we could spend a whole episode
This is a whole
just
different
on
topic, isn't it, really?
how do we engage people through that return to work? Because again, as employers, we want to find the right characters. Let's make sure we don't have silly policies or things in place that are a roadblock to attracting those right people.
Absolutely.
Let's make sure that we are leading by example, that we mean it. If we're going out to the marketplace and saying we want people with drive and passion and commitment, let's actually value that, not FaceTime and sitting in an office for long enough hours to be confident that you're delivering. So I think, you know, whilst we detoured into an example there, I think it's very relevant to our mindset and our attitude as leaders as we're recruiting people into our business. So, you know, obviously what I've heard around accountability is let's create the environment where that is very real. Let's hire people by listening to their stories of when they have demonstrated accountability, when they have actually been able to create results because they've been personally accountable. And I think the final thing I want to point out in your comments there, Karen, was, you know, exploring when people have taken ownership and accountability for their mistakes, not just the good stuff.
Absolutely. And then the next stage of that is the validation of what you're hearing from that person, and we do that through the referencing, and we ask the referees to validate that same experience of them with accountability. What was their experience of that person in that situation? And then of course you can take it from an employer's point of view, that next step through testing to see how they respond to questioning around how they would, in a normal situation, what are they likely to do? So there are many tools available to ensure from an employer's point of view that they are recruiting to the characteristics that they want in their business.
And I'm fascinated by how often managers or leaders will ignore the obvious signs of misalignment sitting right in front of them just because the person has technical competence. And it takes me back to my all-time favourite example of this, where I was helping a client to interview candidates. One candidate came into the interview room, proceeded to put their mobile phone in the middle of the interview table. So that was a bit of alarm bell one. My brain started to go, this is an interesting move. Okay, what's going on in your inner dialogue that says that that's a good idea? And the phone rang. And the candidate's gone, sorry, one moment. Picks up the phone and says, oh mate, can I ring you back later? I'm just in a meeting.
I can actually beat that.
Well, let me finish it, right?
Sorry.
Because at the end of the interview, my alarm bells are just ringing.
Yes.
Lack of respect, lack of professionalism.
No
we could go
self-awareness.
on. But my client didn't see it. My client just went, okay, well, confident person, self-assured. I know,
Wow.
look at Karen's face. This is fantastic. I just want to make sure the camera got your face then, Karen. Because that's right, again, in that moment when the client was focused on the technical competencies, we had to have a really honest conversation. But let's step back here and observe this human.
Yeah.
Again, over to you guys. When have you seen your clients ignore the obvious around culture fit?
I had it the other way, where I had a client eating his cereal during the candidate interview.
Nice.
So the candidates
Was it
actually
crunchy?
turned up, and we're talking a market leader here, by the way, market leader, and the candidates walked in at 9 o'clock and sat down, and the guy's eating his cereal.
And why is that a problem?
Well, I just think in terms of professionalism, I mean, they talk about
Lack of
accountability
respect.
and things like that, lack of respect.
Absolutely.
So I think
Does he have
already.
problems with his blood sugar levels?
Well, I don't know, but you
But
can
you can at
imagine-
least explain that if that's the case,
But the
right?
candidate got the job. He still took the job. So,
Interesting.
I mean, they were one of the market leaders. So, did that candidate really sit there and feel that he had a values alignment? Did your client feel that he really had a values alignment? Probably not. But the need to have a job, the need to have some money and family and mortgages and all these responsibilities that we all have
In that
often
case, yeah.
override. And this is why so many people are so unfulfilled
Yes.
in their job. And
Yes.
I think there is absolutely no excuse for that in today's day and age.
So he's bypassed the manager and looked to the brand and said, okay, well, he might be a douche, but I want to work for the brand.
That's exactly right. That is actually exactly right.
Exactly. So again, for the leader who's watching this episode, wondering, okay, how can I tell? How can I tell if somebody is the right human? In the examples we've just been talking about, sometimes it's not what they say, it's what they do. And one of the things I've always encouraged people to contemplate is other people's observations and feedback. For example, the receptionist. And I can't tell you how often I've gone to the receptionist and said, what was your immediate impression? And the response I've got is they were super rude, but the second you came out, they were love and light, They were all just...
Oh, yeah.
That's a brilliant point.
Yeah.
It's
So
so
again, let's talk
revealing.
about process, right? We talked about interview. Let's get them to tell stories. Let's get them to tell us about a time when. We've obviously mentioned reference checking. What are, again, some of the questions or some of the tips, some of the strategies that you've used and see clients using that actually help us to see who's the real human here that we're dealing with.
Well, I think from a technical perspective, a lot of hiring managers will have behavioural and situational questions based around, and often towards the tail end of the process, there might even be a test case that they have to go through. So I think a lot of businesses and a lot of leaders will technically vet someone very robustly. So it's a great question. How do you then turn that from a technical to a character and values perspective? But again, I think it's a robust process around that technical. Sorry, I've lost all my
The values.
train of thought. The character side of things, but it's behavioural and situational. So in that situation, I had a client ask me once, or a prospective employer, "What's your biggest fear in life?" And I thought, what a great question. I was only 20 years old at the time. And I answered that completely 100% honestly. And off the back of that, got that job. And that was in recruitment. And 12 years later, here I am. So I think he felt that authenticity in answering that. So I think you can throw some curveball questions in there. But you've really got to have those types of questions.
I think the key is to not accept things on the basic peripheral level. It's really do a deep dive. It's asking those open questions and getting people to expand on their answers and really just give more detail around their thought process because people are very well skilled at giving a general interview. They've picked out what are the key competencies to the role. They can give a good example that validates their experience. And to Chris's point, it's about asking unusual questions. It gets them off kilter a bit because they're actually having to be really honest about the response. It's not coming out of the library and something that they've done 20 times that week. they're really having to actually think about it, and they're giving a really honest answer. You know, a couple of the interview that I do with candidates generally is it's geared to opening up that level of self-awareness that they know themselves, and it's about, you know, in an ideal world and the perfect scenario, what is your job? So let's talk about the technical components, but then let's hit on the values and the culture. What is culture to you? Because everyone will say, oh, I want a great culture. And you say, great.
What does that actually look like?
What is that to you?
You
Talk me through what is culture. And that, oh, right, well, this is what I want. So I say, okay, well, dare to dream here. Your perfect manager, how are they working with you? If you think about the best people that you've ever worked for in your life so far, what was it about them that really inspired you to work alongside them? So getting them to think about their own life experience and how that's actually going to play out in the next role that they take. Questions like, you know, what's your superpower that you're going to bring to this role? Oh, okay, well, what's the impact of me in that business? What am I going to share with everyone else about me? So it's really about just going off the norm and what people would see as prescribed questioning and really throwing some curveballs there, but always with depth and definition. Really seek to understand more about what they're talking about rather than the vanilla answer that they're going to give most interviews.
Fantastic. Look, I appreciate both of your insights today, because as we've been talking about, it can be tough. You know, we really are trying to peel back a few of the onion layers and understand how does this person operate on the inside, how is that going to be revealing of the way they're likely to engage in our business. So again, thank you for coming on and joining us today. So that's all we have for the show. Next time on Black Belt Leader, we'll be looking at culture-driven governance. Super excited to be joined by my former boss and managing director of the Vanguard Group when I was there, Jeremy Duffield. Will be here helping us to understand, you know, how you really make sure that your organisation is doing the right thing because you have a great culture. Remember, if you have any topics that you would like us to explore, please get in touch via our website, which is corporatedojo.com, or via our social media channels. Thanks for joining us, and remember, you choose. Will you be an ordinary or an awesome leader of your people?
This is Ticker, your new source for news.